From the moment she is born, the world knows that she should have been a son. Though strong-willed, intelligent and passionate, beneath the image of this magnificent monarch is a vulnerable woman, keenly aware that her life is in constant peril. In an age of assassinations and intrigue, Queen Elizabeth is surrounded by enemies scheming to steal her crown or take her life. She knows she must be both king and queen to a country in turmoil. In 1568, Mary Queen of Scots seeks refuge in England.
Mary Queen of Scots is undoubtedly Elizabeth's rival. Mary was born in 1542, and when she was 6 days old, she became reigning Queen of Scotland. Mary is undoubtedly the biggest threat to Elizabeth, and this is because of her place in the English succession. So Mary is effectively her heir. She is the next hereditary heir to the throne.
Mary Queen of Scots was Elizabeth's first cousin, and she had something of a tempestuous rule in Scotland.
She had been forced to abdicate the Scottish throne in favour of her one-year-old son, James. However, when she arrives in the country, the Catholic Queen is put under house arrest. She will be imprisoned for almost 20 years.
And it was the absolute worst decision she could have taken, because Elizabeth was the one person who could never allow Mary to have her freedom, because Mary is such a threat to her rule.
Mary becomes a figurehead for Catholic resistance under Elizabeth's Protestant rule.
Indeed, people already thought that Mary had a more legitimate claim to the English throne.
And this really matters to Elizabeth, because Elizabeth is still legally illegitimate. So legally she has no title to the throne other than by Act of Parliament and by her father's will.
In 1569, there was a major Catholic uprising led by a number of earls in the north of England. They were to marry Mary to Thomas Howard, the 4th Duke of Norfolk, and declare them King and Queen of England. After the rebellion had been quashed, Elizabeth had 750 rebels executed. In 1580, Pope Gregory XIII issued a clarification to the initial papal bull, explaining that Catholics in England should obey the Queen outwardly in all civil matters until such time as a suitable opportunity presented itself to overthrow her, going as far as to say that it would be no sin to rid the world of such a miserable heretic. Plots against Elizabeth hasten in response. As her endless imprisonment continues, Mary of Scots' own support for the murder of Elizabeth is evident if that would lead to her own liberation and Catholic restoration of England. Thus far, Mary has avoided direct involvement in the plotting and scheming for the throne, but this is about to change. In 1587, correspondence is intercepted by Elizabeth's men that will damn Mary beyond a shadow of a doubt. The letter reads, "Let the great plot commence. Signed, Mary."
It had been proved without doubt that Mary had consented to murder Elizabeth. Elizabeth knew that Mary wanted her dead.
Elizabeth now has no other choice than to sign the death warrant. For years, Elizabeth had conducted her statecraft masterfully and had avoided war despite rising tensions between France and the rest of Catholic Europe. But when news of Mary's execution reached Spain, a war began. King Philip of Spain had assembled a huge fleet of ships and sailed to the Netherlands to meet the Duke of Parma. From there they set anchor at Calais and planned a manned invasion of Elizabeth's Protestant England. the Spanish have a much larger fleet and the odds are stacked against the Queen.
The English were expecting an invasion from Spain, and Philip built a great fleet, the Spanish Armada. So Elizabeth goes to her troops at Tilbury to try and ready her forces.
Elizabeth really showed her mettle at a speech that she gave at Tilbury.
She talks about having the body of a weak and feeble woman, but having the heart and stomach of a king and a king of England.
The English rally their troops, preparing themselves for invasion. But then the weather breaks and the tides turn. Storms form and winds blow, scattering the Spanish fleet.
Her commanders, Lord Howard of Effingham and Francis Drake, are able to scatter the Spanish fleet, partly by aid of a Protestant wind that blows in the English favour.
England sends burning fireships which scorch and sink the Armada's galleons. The English sail back to Plymouth, victorious.
This is where the mythology of Elizabeth really starts. The truth of the matter is that it was more the weather than anything that Elizabeth had done that was the downfall of the Armada. But this is where Elizabeth, the powerful Virgin Queen, really comes into prominence. It is at this point that the mythology of Elizabeth begins.
From this point onwards, she becomes Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the semi-divine monarch of myth and magic.
The defeat of the Armada was the high point of Elizabeth's reign, and we know Elizabeth was a great propagandist, and she was determined to use this to create capital on a European stage. And one way that she did this is actually through iconography. We've got the Armada portrait, which was commissioned, and it shows Elizabeth in her absolute prime.
The Armada portrait, as the name suggests, is painted in the immediate aftermath of the Armada crisis, and it celebrates the victory that the English have achieved and sort of strengthens Elizabeth's power as a result. I think what's really interesting about this portrait is, on the one hand, it belongs to a really specific moment in time. It is directly alluding to the Armada crisis in 1588, but at the same time it projects an image of timelessness, and we see this most clearly in Elizabeth's face. You know, she's in her mid-50s when this portrait is painted, and yet she still has the white skin and the red hair that had become central to her image from the moment that she took the throne decades earlier. In real life, she was maintaining this appearance through heavy makeup and through a wig, and in her portraiture, she always ensured that she was depicted as a kind of youthful figure, an ageless beauty. And this served the purpose of propaganda, particularly in the latter stages of her reign, because it sort of basically saw off potential problems that would arise and instability that would arise from her lack of an heir. It created this appearance of sort of a continuous and sort of unaging, powerful monarch. And in the Armada portrait, that image becomes particularly seductive, particularly powerful, because it's associated with the imagery of maritime triumph and also imperial expansion. She's resting her hand on a globe. This image is sort of saying that Elizabeth's legacy, her power, will continue through the empire that she is building for the future.
It shows Elizabeth as the monarch that she wants to present to the world. She is a warrior queen. She is at the absolute height of her powers.
Elizabeth really refined her image over the years. She understood the power of dressing powerfully, of covering herself in jewels, of accentuating her femininity. And I think this is where the myth of the Virgin Queen really comes from. It's not only a statement about the fact that she is ruling in her own right, that she isn't touched by man.
She also very much uses her femininity to her advantage in her propaganda, because actually being a woman is a major disadvantage for a ruler in the period, and yet actually she is able to use this and to turn it round. Contemporaries talk of being in love with Elizabeth. She's seen as ageless, eternally beautiful. She's the fairy queen. She's Gloriana. And actually, again, we can see this in her portraits because she doesn't age. When we see portraits of Elizabeth, we're seeing Elizabeth through the mirror of propaganda. So her face remains white and unlined and beautiful throughout her reign. It's only paintings painted after her death where we actually start to see the aging queen, because any portrait that was unflattering would simply be destroyed. Elizabeth was destined to be the last of her dynasty, and of course she knew this. She had no children, she had no nephews and nieces. There was no one else to carry on the Tudor line.
Elizabeth died childless, and at the end of her reign came the end of the Tudor dynasty.
Although she's not the first English reigning queen or the first reigning queen in the island of Britain, she was undoubtedly the woman that proved that women could reign in England. She reigned for over 40 years and she reigned independently. She didn't have a king, and she was very much in control of her kingdom. And I think that's her greatest legacy, really. It is her contribution to English queenship. All subsequent reigning queens have to some extent modelled themselves on Elizabeth. We see this with Queen Anne in the 18th century, for example, who, when she becomes queen, she actually takes as her motto, Semper Idem, always the same. And this was the motto of Elizabeth I. And so this is her legacy. She is the first truly great reigning queen on the island of Britain. And very much this is a legacy that she passed on to subsequent generations.